Hi everyone, we're continuing with our Wondrous Stories, and this chapter is called Team Julian. We're starting on page 37, by the way. There it is. All right, I hope that you enjoy. Team Julian. The thing that annoyed me the most when we got back from winter break was that Jack had gone back to being friends with Auggie again. They had had some kind of fight after Halloween, which is why Jack and I started being bros again. But after winter break was over, they were best buds again. It was so lame. I told everyone we needed to really ice Jack out for his own good. He had to choose once and for all whether he wanted to be on Team Auggie or Team Julian and the rest of the world. So we started completely ignoring Jack, not talking to him, not answering his questions. It was like he didn't exist. That'll show him. And that's when I started leaving my little notes. One day, someone had left some post-it notes on one of the benches in the yard, which is what gave me the idea. I wrote in this really psycho-killer handwriting, "Nobody likes you anymore." I slipped it into the slits in Jack's locker when no one was looking. I watched him out of the corner of my eye when he found it. He turned around and saw Henry opening his locker nearby. "Did Julian write this?" he asked. But Henry was one of my peeps, you know. He just iced Jack out, pretending like no one was even talking to him. Jack crumpled the post-it and flicked it into his locker and banged the door shut. After Jack left, I went over to Henry. "Holla," I said, giving him the devil sign, which made Henry laugh. Over the next couple of days, I left a couple of more notes in Jack's locker, and then I started leaving some in Augie's locker. They were not, I repeat, not a big deal. They were mostly stupid stuff. I didn't think anyone would ever take them seriously. I mean, they were actually kind of funny. Well, kind of. At least some of them were. "You stink, Big Cheese." "Freak." "Get out of our school, Orc." No one but Henry and Miles knew that I was writing these notes, and they were sworn to secrecy. This is called Dr. Jansen's office. I don't know how the heck Mr. Tushman found out about them. I don't think Jack or Auggie would have been dumb enough to rat on me because they had started leaving me notes in my locker too. I mean, how stupid would you have to be to rat out someone when you were doing the same thing that someone else was doing? So here's what happened. A few days before the 5th grade nature retreat, which I was totally looking forward to, Mom got a phone call from Dr. Jensen, the headmaster of Beecher Prep. He said he wanted to discuss something with her and Dad and asked for a meeting. Mom assumed it probably had to do with Mr. Tushman, that maybe he was getting fired, so she was actually kind of excited about the meeting. They showed up for the appointment at 10 a.m., and then they were waiting in Dr. Jensen's office, when all of a sudden they see me walking into the office too. Miss Rubin had taken me out of class, asked me to follow her, and brought me there. I had no idea what was up. I'd never even been to the headmaster's office before, so when I saw Mom and Dad there, I looked as confused as they looked. "What's going on?" Mom said to Miss Rubin. Before Miss Rubin could say anything, Mr. Tushman and Dr. Jansen came into the room. Everyone shook hands, and they were all smiles as they greeted one another. Miss Rubin said she had to go back to class, but that she would call Mom and Dad later to check in. This surprised Mom. I could tell she started thinking that maybe this wasn't about Mr. Tushman getting fired after all. Then Dr. Jansen asked us to sit on the sofa opposite his desk. Mr. Tushman sat down in a chair next to us, and Dr. Jansen sat behind his desk. "Well, thank you so much for coming, Melissa and Jules," Dr. Jansen said to my parents. It was strange hearing him call them by their first names. I knew they all knew each other from being on the board, but it sounded weird. "I know how busy you are, and I'm sure you're wondering what this is all about." "Well, yes," said Mom, but her voice drifted off. Dad coughed into his hand. "The reason we asked you here today is because, unfortunately, Dr. Jansen continued. We have a serious matter on our hands, and we'd like to figure out the best way to resolve it. Julian, do you have any inkling of what I might be talking about? He looked at me. I opened my eyes wide. Me? I snapped my head back and made a face. No? Dr. Jansen smiled and sighed at me at the same time. He took off his glasses. You understand, he said, looking at me. We take bullying very seriously at Beecher Prep. There's zero tolerance for any kind of bullying. We feel that every single one of our students deserves the right to learn in a caring and respectful atmosphere. Excuse me, but can someone tell me what's going on here? Mom interrupted, looking at Dr. Jansen impatiently. We obviously know the mission statement at Beecher Prep. We practically wrote it, Hal. Let's cut to the chase. What's going on? This chapter is called Evidence. Dr. Jansen looked at Mr. Tushman. Why don't you explain, Larry? He said. Mr. Tushman handed an envelope to Mom and Dad. Mom opened it and pulled out the last 3 Post-it notes that I had left in Augie's locker. I knew immediately that's what they were because they were actually pink Post-its and not yellow ones like all the others had been. So I thought, aha, so it was Auggie who told Mr. Tushman about the Post-it notes. What a turd. Mom read through the notes quickly, raised her eyebrows, and passed them to Dad. He read them and looked at me. You wrote these, Julian? He said, holding the notes out for me. I swallowed. I looked at him kind of blankly. He handed me the notes and I just stared at him. Well, I answered. Yeah, I guess, but Dad, they were writing notes too. Who was writing notes? Asked Dad. Jack and Auggie, I answered. They were writing notes to me too. It just wasn't me. But you started the note writing, didn't you? Asked Mr. Tushman. Excuse me, Mom interjected angrily. Let's not forget that it was Jack Will who punched Julian in the mouth, not the other way around. Obviously, there's going to be residual anger. How many of these notes did you write, Julian? Dad interrupted, tapping on the Post-its I was holding. I don't know, I said. It was hard for me to get the words out. Like 6 or something, but the other ones weren't this, bad. These notes are worse than the other ones I wrote. The other ones weren't so... My voice kind of drifted off as I reread what I'd written on the 3 notes. Yo, Darth Hideous, you're so ugly you should wear a mask every day. And, I hate you, freak. And the last one says, I bet your mother wishes you hadn't been born. You should do everybody a favor and die. Of course, looking at them now, they seemed a lot worse than when I wrote them. But I was mad then, super mad. I had just got one of their notes and... Wait, I said, and I reached into my pocket. I found the last Post-it that Auggie and Jack had left for me in my locker yesterday. It was crumpled up now, but I held it out to Mr. Tushman to read. Look, they wrote mean stuff to me too. Mr. Tushman took the Post-it, read it quickly, and handed it to my parents. Mom read it and then looked at the floor. My dad read it and shook his head, puzzled. He handed me the Post-it, and I reread it. Julian, you're hot. Summer doesn't like you, but I want you to smell my armpits. Love, Beulah. Who the heck is Beulah? Asked Dad. Never mind, I answered. I can't explain. I handed the Post-its back to Mr. Tushman, who gave it to Dr. Jansen to read. I noticed he actually tried to hide a smile. Julian, said Mr. Tushman, the 3 notes you wrote don't compare at all to this note in content. I don't think it's for anyone else to judge the semantics of a note, said Mom. It doesn't matter whether you think one note is worse than the other. It's how the person reading the note reads it. The fact is, Julian's had a little crush on this summer girl all year long, and it probably hurt his feelings. Mom! I yelled, and I covered my face with my hands. That's so embarrassing. All I'm saying is that a note can be hurtful to a child whether you see it or not, Mom said to Mr. Tushman. Are you kidding me? Answered Mr. Tushman, shaking his head. He sounded angrier than I had ever heard him before. Are you telling me you don't find the post-its your son wrote completely horrifying? Because I do. I'm not defending the notes, answered Mom. I am just reminding you that it was a two-way street. You have to realize that Julian was obviously writing those notes as a reaction to something. Look, said Dr. Jansen, holding his hand out in front of him like a crossing guard. There's no doubt there's some history here. Those notes hurt my feelings, I said, and I didn't mind that I sounded like I was going to cry. I don't doubt that those notes hurt your feelings, Julian, Dr. Jansen answered. And you were trying to hurt their feelings. That's the problem with stuff like this. Everyone keeps trying to top one another, and then things escalate out of control. Exactly, said Mom, and it almost sounded like she screamed it. But the fact is, Dr. Jansen continued, holding up his finger, there is a line, Julian. There is a line. And your notes cross that line. They're completely unacceptable. If Auggie had read these notes, how do you think he'd feel? He was looking at me so intensely that I felt like disappearing under the sofa. You mean he hasn't read them? I asked. No, answered Dr. Jansen. Thank goodness someone reported the notes to Mr. Tushman yesterday, and he opened Augie's locker and intercepted them before Auggie ever saw them. I nodded and lowered my head. I have to admit, I was glad Auggie hadn't read them. I guess I knew what Dr. Jansen meant about crossing the line. But then I thought, so if it wasn't Auggie who ratted me out, who was it? We were all quiet for a minute or two. It was awkward beyond belief. Tomorrow, kids, we're going to talk about what happens next, and it's going to be through a chapter called The Verdict. Thanks so much for listening.